If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be standing in my own kitchen, watching my parents walk through my home like they were already measuring the walls for their furniture, I would have laughed. I would have said, "That's not my family. We don't do that to each other." But here's what I've learned. You don't really know what people are capable of until they need something from you. My name is Vanessa. I'm 31 years old. I'm a physical therapist at a rehab center in Columbus, Ohio. I own a two-bedroom house on a quiet street with a maple tree in the front yard that turns the most ridiculous shade of orange every October. And I bought it myself, with my own credit, my own down payment, my own 10 years of showing up to work even when I was exhausted and underpaid and absolutely certain I had chosen the wrong career. I need you to understand that before I tell you anything else. Because everything that happened, the calls, the ultimatums, the afternoon my mother looked me in the eye and said things I still can't fully repeat, it all comes back to that house. And I need you to know what that house cost me before you judge a single decision I made. My parents live in Dayton, about an hour away. My older brother, Connor, lives in Scottsdale, Arizona, in a house my parents helped him buy when he was 26. They called it a family investment. They gave him $65,000 toward his down payment. I was 22 at the time, just starting my PT program, and my parents sat me down and explained very carefully that Connor was at a critical stage in his career, and the timing made sense, and that when my time came, they would be there for me too. I believed them. I was 22. I still believed most things my parents told me. My time never came. Or rather, it came in a different form than I expected. I saved for 7 years. I skipped vacations. I drove a 2013 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard until last year. I ate lunch at home between clients 4 days a week, when I finally had enough for a down payment on a modest house in a decent neighborhood. I did it entirely on my own. I didn't ask my parents for money because I already knew the answer. What I didn't know was that they would interpret my independence as a kind of resource. I closed on my house in March of last year. My parents came to see it in April. My mother walked through every room with her arms crossed, not saying much, just looking. My father asked me twice how much my mortgage payment was. I told him. He nodded slowly like he was doing math. At the time I thought they were just curious. Proud, maybe. I thought the silence was admiration. I was wrong about that too. The first phone call came in June. My mother called on a Tuesday evening while I was making dinner. She asked how things were going, how work was, whether I'd been sleeping okay. Normal questions. Then, after about 10 minutes of nothing, she said, almost casually, "Your father and I have been thinking about our situation." I turned the stove down. "What situation?" "Well, we've had some setbacks. Financially. We've been talking to a financial advisor, and things are a little more complicated than we thought." I asked her to explain. She was vague. Something about investments that hadn't performed well. A retirement account that had taken losses during the market dip. She used a lot of words without saying very much, and by the end of the conversation, I wasn't sure if they were worried or just venting. "We might need to make some changes," she said, before we hung up. I said, "Okay. I hope things work out." I meant it. I didn't hear anything specific for another 6 weeks. Then my brother called. Connor and I have always been close in the way that siblings who grew up in the same house are close. We share a history. We understand each other's references. We can sit in comfortable silence. But we've never been the kind of siblings who tell each other everything. There are things Connor knows about our family that I don't, and things I know that he doesn't, and we've both always tacitly agreed not to dig too hard. So when he called me on a Sunday morning, I knew immediately that something was happening. "Have Mom and Dad talked to you?" he asked. "Mom said something vague about finances a few weeks ago. Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "They want to sell the house in Dayton." I waited. "Okay. And they want to move in with you." I set down my coffee. "What?" "Temporarily," he said. "That's what they're saying. While they figure things out." "Connor, I have a two-bedroom house. One bedroom is my office. Where exactly are they planning to?" They said you could convert the office, get a sleeper sofa. They think it's manageable. They've already planned this out. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Why can't they come to you? I asked. You have a 3-bedroom in Scottsdale. Another pause. Longer this time. Abby's pregnant. We're using the extra room. It's not a great time. His wife Abby was indeed pregnant with their second child. I knew that. I didn't say anything immediately cruel because I was trying very hard not to be the person who says something immediately cruel, but I was sitting there in my kitchen. The kitchen I had picked out the backsplash tiles for myself. The kitchen with the window that looks out at the maple tree. And I was being told that my parents had already decided where they were going to live without asking me first. When were they going to tell me? I asked. I think Mom's calling this week. I said goodbye to Connor and sat with my coffee until it went cold. My mother called 3 days later. She presented it the way she presents most things she's already decided, framed as a conversation, structured as a verdict. She explained the financial situation in more detail this time. They had sold some investments at a loss trying to cover a loan that had gone sideways. The house in Dayton was underwater, not dramatically but enough that selling it would leave them with very little liquid cash. They needed time. They needed somewhere stable while they regrouped. We were thinking we could stay with you, she said. Just while we get back on our feet. Maybe 6 months. Maybe a little longer. Mom, I said carefully. I only have 2 bedrooms. One of them is where I see clients virtually 3 times a week. You could work from the living room. I see physical therapy patients. I need the space. Just a couple days a week. I told her I needed time to think about it. She said she understood. Her voice said something different. What I didn't say on that phone call, what I spent the next week turning over and over in my head, was that I already knew how this would go. I'd watched my parents move through life leaving trails of good intentions and poorly managed consequences. The 6 months would become a year. The year would become indefinite. My office would become their room. My living room would become their living room. I would come home from 10-hour shifts at the rehab center and my father would be watching television in my space, and my mother would have reorganized my kitchen cabinets because she didn't like where I kept the mugs. I knew this the way you know some things in your body before your brain catches up. I knew it the way I knew at 22 that the money they gave Connor was never going to come for me. I called my mother back after 8 days and told her, as gently as I could, that I didn't think it was a good idea. I told her I loved them. I told her I wanted to help in other ways. Help them look at apartments. Help them make a budget. Research senior living options if it came to that. I said I was there for them, just not in the way they were asking. My mother went silent. Then she said, "After everything we've done for you." I took a breath. Mom, I bought my house myself. I didn't ask you for anything. We raised you. We put you through school. You helped with my undergrad. I took out loans for my PT program. I appreciate what you did. And I'm not trying to be ungrateful, but... She hung up. My father called an hour later. He was calmer, more measured. The way he always is when he's been given time to prepare. He said my mother was upset. He said they were under a lot of stress. He asked me to reconsider. He said he wasn't asking me to sacrifice anything permanent, just some space, just for now, just while they figured things out. He used the word family 7 times in about 4 minutes. I counted because I was trying to stay calm and counting things helps. I told him what I'd told my mother. I was as kind as I knew how to be. I told him I loved him. He said he was disappointed in me. Then he said goodbye. For 2 weeks, nobody called. I told myself I was relieved. Most nights I wasn't. Then a Saturday came in early August that I will remember for the rest of my life. I was home. I'd worked that morning, come home around noon, made lunch, and was sitting on my couch reading when I heard a car in my driveway. I looked out the window and felt my stomach drop before my brain fully processed what I was seeing. My parents' Buick. Both of them getting out. My mother opening the back door of the car. A suitcase. I got to the front door before they knocked. "What is this?" I asked. My mother looked past me into the house. "We sold the Dayton house. Closing was yesterday." "You what?" "We need somewhere to stay, Vanessa. We don't have anywhere else. You didn't tell me the closing was happening. You didn't ask me. We're your parents." She said it like that settled it. Like those 3 words were a master key. My father was standing by the car with the suitcase looking at the ground. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had made a series of decisions and was now living inside their consequences, and some part of me ached for him even then. Even standing in my doorway with my heart hammering, I felt that ache. But I also felt something else. Something steadier. "You can come inside," I said, "but we need to talk before anything comes out of that car." We sat in my living room. My mother on the armchair she had already, I noticed, identified as where she would sit. My father on the couch. Me on the opposite end of the couch, turned slightly toward them. I said, "I told you both that I couldn't do this. I meant it. I understand you're in a hard situation and I am genuinely sorry about that, but you sold your house and showed up without calling me. That's not okay." My mother said, "We didn't have a choice. You had choices. You could have rented an apartment. You could have gone to Connor. Connor's wife is pregnant. We're not going to burden them. But you'll burden me." Her jaw tightened. "That's a terrible thing to say, Mom. I told you no. I told you clearly. And you came anyway." She stood up. I didn't expect her to stand up. She walked the 3 steps between the armchair and the couch, and she looked down at me and she said in a voice I'd never heard from her before, "You are being a selfish, ungrateful child, and I am ashamed of you." And then she slapped me across the face. I don't know how long I sat there afterward. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt like a long stretch of very quiet time. My cheek was hot. My father had made a sound, not a word, just a sound. My mother sat back down and crossed her arms like nothing had happened. I stood up. I walked to the front door and opened it. I said, "You need to leave, both of you, right now." My father said, "Vanessa, right now, Dad, please." My mother said, "You can't just, you hit me." I said it very clearly. "In my house, you need to go." They left. It took another 10 minutes and it was not quiet, but they left. It took another 10 minutes and it was not quiet, but they left. I stood in my doorway and watched the Buick back out of my driveway, and I closed my door and I sat on my kitchen floor for a while, because sometimes the kitchen floor is the only place that makes sense. The next morning I called a lawyer. I want to be very clear about this part because it matters. I did not call a lawyer to punish my parents. I called a lawyer because I needed to understand my rights, and because what had happened needed to be documented. My attorney, a woman who specialized in family estate matters and property law, walked me through everything. She helped me draft a formal letter of no trespass. She advised me on what my options were if they showed up again. She also gently pointed out that the slap, documented, could be relevant if things escalated. I sent the letter. I texted my brother and told him what had happened, including the part about being slapped. He called me within the hour. He was, I think, genuinely shocked. He said he hadn't known they were going to just show up. I believed him. He asked what he'd do. I said I didn't know yet. September passed. October came and the maple tree did its thing, turned that impossible orange, and I stood at my window one morning looking at it, feeling something I couldn't quite name. Not peace, exactly. More like ground under my feet. My parents got a 2-bedroom apartment in a suburb of Columbus. I found out through Connor. I don't know how they financed it, I didn't ask. In November, something happened that I hadn't expected. My father called. It was a Thursday evening. I almost didn't answer. When I did, he said, "I think I owe you an apology." I didn't say anything. I let him keep talking. He said that what my mother had done was wrong. He said he should have stepped in and he hadn't, and he was sorry for that. He said that they had been scared and had made bad decisions, and had treated me unfairly, and that including the $65,000 they'd given Connor years ago, which he brought up himself. He said he didn't know how to make it right, but he wanted me to know that he knew he was wrong. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long time after he finished. I said, "I need you to understand that even if we find a way through this, things can't go back to the way they were. I'm not able to pretend the last few months didn't happen." He said he understood. I said I'd need time. He said he'd wait. That conversation didn't fix anything. There's no version of this where one phone call fixes what was broken. But it was something. It was a start that I didn't know I was going to get. I still haven't spoken to my mother. Not properly. There were 2 texts in December. One that said, "Merry Christmas," and one that I answered with "You too," because I'm not made of stone. Even when I'm angry. Even when I'm hurt. Even when I'm still figuring out where the hurt ends and the healing starts. What I know now is this: you were allowed to love your family and still hold a line. You were allowed to grieve what you thought your family was and still protect what you've built. You are allowed to say, "This is mine, and I worked for it, and I'm not giving it up." Even when the person asking is someone you've loved your whole life. I stood in my kitchen last week, making coffee before my shift, watching the early light come through the window above the sink. My house was quiet. My coffee was hot. My name is on the deed and the mortgage, and every piece of paper that has anything to do with this place, and I got there myself. When my father called that evening in November and said he was sorry, I had been sitting right here. In this kitchen. In this house that I built. I calmly said, "I know, Dad. I know." People always want to know what the turning point was. Like there's one clean moment where everything shifted and suddenly you knew exactly what to do. It's never like that. At least it wasn't for me. The turning point wasn't the slap, though that's the thing that sounds most dramatic when I tell this story. The turning point was actually quieter than that. It was me, sitting on my kitchen floor after my parents drove away. Not crying, just breathing. Looking at the baseboards I had painted myself, feeling the tile I had picked out from 3 different samples on a Saturday afternoon 2 years before, and thinking, I built this. Nobody helped me build this. And I almost gave it away because I was afraid of disappointing people who had already decided I mattered less. That's the thing about certain family dynamics that nobody talks about plainly enough. The damage doesn't come from one big dramatic event. It comes from years of small signals. Who gets the $65,000 and who gets the explanation about why it isn't their turn yet? Who gets to have a complicated situation and who's expected to absorb everyone else's complications? By the time my mother stood in my living room and raised her hand, I had already spent a decade quietly accepting the message that my needs were negotiable, and my brothers weren't. What changed wasn't my feelings about my parents. I still love them. That's one of the harder truths about this whole thing. The love doesn't go anywhere. It just has to learn to live alongside the clarity. What changed was my understanding that love, real love, doesn't ask you to hollow yourself out to prove it, and that when someone confuses your boundaries for betrayal, that's information about them, not a verdict about you. My father came around. I believe he meant what he said on that November phone call. I think he looked at what had happened and felt genuine shame, and that shame led somewhere real. That matters. People can surprise you in both directions, and I try to stay open to that. My mother and I are still finding our way. Some days I think we'll get there. Some days I'm not sure what there even looks like anymore. What I know is that I'm not going to rush it. Healing on someone else's timeline is how I ended up in that situation in the first place. The maple tree up front is in full bloom right now. I look at it most mornings when I'm making coffee. I think about how I almost let fear make that decision for me. Fear of being seen as selfish. Fear of the guilt. Fear of the word ungrateful landing on me and sticking. Those fears were real. I'm not pretending they weren't. But fear is a terrible architect. Everything it builds is too small to actually live in. What I want, if you're somewhere in the middle of something like this right now, is for you to hear this. Protecting what you earned is not the same as abandoning the people you love. Saying no is not cruelty. And a house, or a boundary, or a life you constructed carefully and slowly with your own hands, is not a selfish thing to keep. I chose me. I'd do it again.